What's going on, everybody? On SportsCenter today, the conversation turned to a fascinating development that has been making the rounds in NBA circles, and it involves none other than the Los Angeles Lakers, the Miami Heat, and the Brooklyn Nets. Reports surface that the Lakers are once again exploring the possibility of acquiring Andrew Wiggins, and the timing of these talks is crucial because the organization wants to see if something can get done before training camp officially tips off. The message is clear. Los Angeles is pushing to strengthen its wing rotation, but they're trying to do it without overextending their assets. Now, what came up on the show was the real tension point in negotiation. The Lakers are not eager to include a future first-round pick. That has been a sticking issue. Instead, the names most frequently tied to the deal are Rui Hachimura and rookie Dalton Knecht. Some reports indicated it could be Knecht plus expiring contracts, but the math doesn't fully check out unless Hachimura is included. That's because Wiggins' salary is simply too large to match cleanly without additional pieces. So, the Lakers are weighing their options. Do they hold on to Rui and sacrifice a first-round pick, or do they part with Rui to preserve that future flexibility? We broke down the possibilities in detail. If the Lakers manage to keep Hachimura, he slides into a valuable bench role, a sixth man who can provide scoring punch, versatility, and lineup flexibility. Imagine situations where LeBron takes a night off, and the Lakers slot Wiggins at the 3, Hachimura at the 4, or nights when Austin Reeves sits, Wiggins shifts over, and Rui fills in to stabilize the second unit. That depth is something Los Angeles has been lacking, and it explains why there's genuine hesitation about including him. On the flip side, his contract could also be viewed as a trade asset later in the year, since it holds value as an expiring. That kind of optionality makes the decision even more complicated. But here's the catch. Hachimura and Knecht alone don't get the Lakers to Wiggins financially. They would still need to either dump salary elsewhere or bring in a third team. And that's where the reported framework of a three-team trade comes in. On SportsCenter, we spent time unpacking the details of a proposal making the rounds, originally from Bleacher Report. And unlike many of the lopsided trade ideas that often come across the Lakers' desk, this one had a different flavor. For once, it didn't feel like Los Angeles was the team getting squeezed. Instead, some on the panel felt Miami might actually be the one giving up too much. In the structure we discussed, Los Angeles would walk away with Andrew Wiggins, Jaime Jaquez Jr., and Drew Timme. That's a haul that would immediately reshape their rotation. Wiggins provides the proven two-way wing they've coveted. Jaquez is a young, polished player who many felt the Lakers should have targeted in last year's draft. And Timme is a developmental big who offers front-court depth at virtually no financial cost. On paper, that's an impressive package for a team that has been hesitant to overcommit draft capital. Meanwhile, the Heat would receive Rui Hachimura, Dalton Knecht, and a $10 million trade exception. The idea there is that the exception could give Miami flexibility down the road, either as a tool to acquire another rotation player or simply as cap maneuvering. Still, the sense from the panel was that Miami would likely want additional sweetener, perhaps a pick swap or other draft considerations, to make the math worth it. After all, trading away Jaquez, who has been one of their most promising young pieces, isn't something the Heat would do lightly. And finally, in this three-team concept, the Brooklyn Nets would step in to absorb salary while receiving Maxi Kleber, some minor financial offsets, and a protected 2026 second-round pick via Miami. Now, that particular pick is so heavily protected that it might never actually convey, meaning Brooklyn isn't exactly landing a game-changing asset, but they are at least compensated for facilitating. All of this highlights just how complex three-team negotiations can get. The Lakers' motivation is straightforward. They want Wiggins in purple and gold before camp. But the execution requires balancing multiple layers of salary cap mechanics, asset valuations, and timing. And that's where the intrigue really comes in. On SportsCenter, the conversation made it clear that while the structure is creative, questions remain about whether Miami would actually greenlight such a move. For Los Angeles, though, this is the kind of deal that could reshape their rotation overnight. giving them the wing depth and lineup flexibility they've been searching for. So, this was the central takeaway today. The Lakers are actively pursuing avenues to land Wiggins, and while a straight two-team deal is unrealistic, the involvement of a third franchise like Brooklyn could open the door. The challenge, however, is whether Miami feels the return is worth it. As of now, that remains the biggest obstacle. On SportsCenter today, the discussion picked up right where it left off, and the focus was on why a deal of this magnitude is so tricky to pull off. Because when you look at Andrew Wiggins' situation, it's never as simple as just finding a trade partner. We broke down the layers of it on the show, and what became clear is that Miami, in particular, faces unique challenges in trying to move his contract. Remember, just to move off of Haywood Highsmith in the past, Miami had to attach a second-round pick. That's the kind of cost it takes to shed salary in today's league. So, when you talk about moving off of Wiggins, a player owed close to $30 million with a player option for the following season, the Heat can't just assume there's a line of teams eager to take him on. In concept, they would almost certainly have to give up something of value to make it work. And that's where the Lakers come in. Los Angeles benefits because the Heat have incentive to clear their books, but they also need to find a team Wiggins would actually want to play for. That's not a small detail. Because of the player option, a team that doesn't appeal to Wiggins might hesitate to give up real assets, fearing he could walk away after a year. So Miami's leverage is limited. Without a franchise like the Lakers in the mix, the Heat would be left searching for a club that values Wiggins highly enough to trade for him, while also holding the right contracts to make the money work. And that's not an easy equation to solve. On the program, we made it clear. Miami can't just send Wiggins anywhere. They need a partner who fits both financially and competitively. That's why a third team, in this case Brooklyn, becomes so important. It's not just about balancing the books. It's about keeping the Lakers under the cap, allowing Miami to maintain roster flexibility, and giving Wiggins a destination that makes sense from his perspective. Without that, the trade stall. Now, from Los Angeles' point of view, this is where things get interesting. If this trade were to materialize, the Lakers would be walking away with Andrew Wiggins, Jaime Jaquez Jr., and Drew Timm. And let's be honest, that's the kind of return that could dramatically alter their rotation. On the show, we highlighted how Jaquez, in particular, is a fascinating piece here. His minutes dipped in Miami last season, sparking questions about where exactly he fit in their plan. But in Los Angeles, he's a young, versatile player who can slot into multiple roles. And he happens to be a hometown product, someone many felt the Lakers should have drafted in the first place. For them, it's almost a chance to correct a past mistake. As for Drew Timm, he's not expected to be a centerpiece, but he does give the Lakers something they badly need: front court depth. With the possibility of moving on from Maxi Kleber to make the finances work, Timmy could at least serve as a stopgap or even a trade chip if the right opportunity comes along. On the program, the panel even toyed with the idea of flipping him later to bring in another veteran piece. Imagine a scenario where the Lakers turn this into not just Wiggins and Jaquez, but eventually add another proven name like a steady big man or a defensive-minded guard. Suddenly, you're looking at a roster with far more depth and versatility than it had just a year ago. And that's why, when we framed it in the bigger picture, some analysts on the show went as far as to say, if Los Angeles came out of this scenario with Wiggins, Jaquez, and eventually another veteran through a smaller move, they'd instantly vault themselves back into the championship conversation. That's the scale of impact a trade like this could have. Miami's side, though, is more complicated. Yes, they'd accomplish their main goal, moving Wiggins' salary off the books. They'd also add Rui Hachimura, who fits their mold as a hard-nosed forward on an expiring contract, and Dalton Knecht, a young shooter who could grow into a rotation role. On top of that, they'd receive a $10 million trade exception, which gives them a tool to use later in the season. But here's the sticking point that dominated much of the debate. Is that enough for Miami? The consensus was no, not without at least a first-round pick or a meaningful swap. Because giving up both Wiggins and Jaquez for that package, even if the second-round pick they're moving is so heavily protected, that it likely never conveys still feels like a net loss for a team that wants to stay competitive around its core. And then, of course, there's the numbers game. For this to truly make sense, the Lakers have to send out 3 players and take 3 players back. That solves a critical issue for them because they don't have the flexibility to offload multiple contracts and then try to fill open roster spots later with limited cap space. This type of structure neatly balances those concerns. But if you start removing players like Jaquez or Timmy from the equation, suddenly the math doesn't work, and the Lakers are left scrambling to backfill. That's why the framework we discussed on SportsCenter today actually makes sense on paper, even if it still feels unlikely in practice. So the big takeaway in part 2 of this discussion was this. For the Lakers, the trade is almost too good to pass up. They'd get immediate help, young talent, and financial flexibility all at once. For Miami, though, the calculation is tougher. The Heat clear their books, yes, but they're left asking themselves whether that return is really worth losing both Wiggins and Jaquez. And that's the kind of tension that makes this 3-team proposal so fascinating. It checks the boxes for Los Angeles, it functions financially, but it may leave Miami with more questions than answers. On SportsCenter today, we wrapped up the conversation about this proposed 3-team deal between the Lakers, the Heat, and the Nets. And the final segment really drove home just how intriguing this idea is. Because when you take a step back and look at what the Lakers could potentially walk away with, Andrew Wiggins, Jaime Jaquez Jr., and even Drew Timme as a roster piece, you begin to understand why this has been such a talking point. Now, the panel was quick to note that even though Timme might not end up sticking long-term, the core of the deal is still Wiggins and Jaquez, and that alone raises the question, how much would Los Angeles be willing to give up to make that happen? The sentiment was clear. At some point, draft capital has to enter the conversation. Because if you told the Lakers they could land Wiggins and Jaquez even at the cost of Rui Hachimura, Dalton Neck, Maxi Kleber, and a first-round pick, it would be very hard for them to walk away. Think about what that package does. First, it upgrades the starting lineup immediately. Wiggins, when healthy and engaged, is a clear improvement over Hachimura at the forward spot. Jaquez, despite tapering off in his second season, showed as a rookie that he can be a versatile, high IQ player, and a return to his hometown could spark a resurgence. And then, depending on how the financial mechanics shake out, the Lakers might even have the space to go after another veteran, someone like Al Horford, who could stabilize both the 4 and 5 spots. That's why the panel emphasized, if Los Angeles somehow came away with Wiggins, Jaquez, and Horford, that's the type of roster shift that could push them straight back into the championship conversation. From Miami's perspective, the deal is less about the names and more about the numbers. Clearing Wiggins' contract opens up crucial flexibility moving forward. Adding Connect gives them a developmental piece, while Rui provides a steady veteran presence on an expiring deal. And let's not forget the $10 million trade exception. That's a valuable tool, giving the Heat the option to re-enter the market later in the season if an opportunity presents itself. On the show, it was pointed out that this exception could be the hidden gem for Miami, a way to stay active in reshaping the roster without being locked into long-term commitment. But here's the sticking point. Miami isn't going to part with both Wiggins and Jaquez without some form of draft compensation. Even if the second-round pick they're giving up is so heavily protected that it's essentially meaningless, they're still surrendering 2 players who, in theory, could hold real value. So the expectation is that Miami would push hard for at least a first-rounder, or at minimum a pick swap, to balance the scale. And this is where the conversation got nuanced on SportsCenter. One analyst argued that Miami's valuation of Jaquez isn't particularly high right now, given how his role diminished last season. That could make them more open to including him in a deal like this, but another countered that Miami, a franchise known for squeezing every ounce of value out of its assets, would still demand a draft sweetener, no matter how small, just to justify the optics of sending him out alongside Wiggins. For Brooklyn, the role remains straightforward. They act as the facilitator, absorbing Kleber's salary and picking up a minor draft asset in return. They don't need to do much heavy lifting here, and that's why their involvement makes the deal possible. Without a team like the Nets willing to be that middleman, the entire structure likely collapses. So, as we closed out the segment, the overall tone was this. For the Lakers, this trade checks every box. It upgrades the roster, it balances the salaries, and it even opens the door for additional moves. For Miami, the calculus is tougher. They get flexibility, yes, but do they get enough value in return? And for Brooklyn, it's simply about picking up assets for playing their part. The message from today's Sports Center was clear. This three-team proposal might not be perfect, but it's not outlandish either. Everyone involved gets something they want, even if Miami still has reasons to hesitate. And that's what makes it such a fascinating scenario to track.